The control hide / control hide on empty function will allow us to hide certain elements when one condition meets another. So we're going to set up a couple of different examples of how you can actually use this. The first one being is that we're going to first use a font and a bullet point example. So I'm going to drag a font down into the scene tree, and I'm just going to move this to the left a little bit and up, and we're also just going to throw a material on it so that we can see it a little bit better. Now anytime we're dealing with control objects and you're taking the scene into Trio or Content Pilot or Template Wizard, you'll need a top level group. So I'm just going to group this font so that we have a top level group here. Now I also want to create some type of bullet point for this font. So I'm just going to use a cone and I'm going to drag it down as a sub-container of the font. Now it does take on that material blue, so if we want to override that blue material, we can just slide another material down onto this cone and we can override it. So I just want to set this up here so that it's a bullet point, so I'm just going to rotate it a little bit, scale it down, and reposition my cone here. And I'm going to go back into my control plugins. And first thing I want to be able to do is change the text. So I'm going to slide a control text down onto this font. And I also want to be able to hide this bullet point if the text container is empty. So I'm going to slide this control hide function down onto my cone. I'm going to come into my control text function. The field identifier is set to 1. I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to leave all the default values as is in the control text function. I'm going to come to my control hide function. I'm going to leave the field identifier at 1 as well. The description, it picked it up from the container, so I'm going to leave that as is. However, I am going to turn this tree input as numerical hide on 0 off. So I'm going to save this scene and we're going to go into Trio and test this out. So once in Trio, I'm going to go to my import scenes, find the control hide on empty scene that we made, and I'm going to import it by double clicking it or dragging it left into this window. Once it's imported, I'm going to double click on it, and within my tab fields down here, I have the option for our text. So as I type in here within my text box, you can see how that bullet point appears. And if I delete all of my text, that bullet point is automatically going to disappear since our control hide on empty was on that bullet point. So we'll go back into Vizrt Artist and use this in another example. So I'm going to get rid of that group that we just made. I'm going to start a new group here, and we're going to drag a font down first of all. So I'm first going to drag a font within that group, and let's create another group. And this time we're going to throw in a couple of built-in objects. So I'll just drag this ellipse down, a cube, and we'll also use a circle. Now I just want to throw a material on each one of these so that we'll be able to see it a little bit better. So let's just throw these two materials on it that I have saved in my favorites, and I'll just copy them down to each container. Now I want to spread these built-in objects out, so my ellipse is on the left and my circle here I'm just going to spread out to the right. So let's move our font over here, and I'm just going to quickly change the text to. We'll just type in 2 letters there, and let's just reposition this here. So we can see that font there behind our ellipse. So we want the ability to switch each one of these built-in objects off. So I'm going to use my OMO to control this. So I'm going to go into my tools folder and slide my OMO onto my group here that contains each one of these built-ins. Now anytime that we're building a scene for Trio, for Content Pilot, or Template Wizard, we need to have a top level group. So I am going to group these 2 groups into another group. And if you want to change this name, you can. So I'll just call this the main group now for demonstration purposes. So when I click on my OMO here and I switch through each one, you see how it switches each one of these objects. Now I also want to be able to control this OMO, so I'm going to go into my control folder and use the control OMO. And if you want to see more about the control OMO, you can watch the control OMO video. So I'm going to come into my control OMO. My field identifier is set to 1. I'm going to leave it as is. Description is on group. That's fine. I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to leave the default settings as is. Now within my text variable, I want to add the control hide on empty on this text. So I'm going to drag that down, click on it, and go into my control hide on empty function editor, and I'm going to leave the field identifier as is. So when I hit save, and we're going to go into Trio and test this scene out. So once I'm in Trio, I already have this scene imported, so I'm just going to right click here and I can re-import this scene, and it picks up the new variables that we changed. So as I click on it, it gives us the tab field down here. we have one field identifier, which it says 1, the group. So as you can see here, it's set to 0, and our text is off because in our Control Hide On Empty, we had our Treat as Numerical Import button on. So as I change this to 1 and hit enter, you can see how our text now appears. And if I change it to 2, we get the other object and our text is there. However, if I change this back to 0, it goes and disappears the text or hides the text. Because in Vizrt Artist, we had our Control Hide On Empty, our Treat Input as Numerical Value was on. So that is what that button does as far as numerical values. Now let's use one more example here, and we'll just do another quick one. And again, I'm just going to start with a basic main group. And this time I'm going to use a rectangle to treat as a backplate for our font. So I'm just going to quickly come in here and use my vertex colors and change it to a different color and slide each one of these color variables down here. I'm just going to spread my width of the rectangle out, and we'll just lower the height a little bit. Now we're also going to go back and drag some type of font down here in this group too. Now when we drug this font down, we didn't see it, so I'm just going to increase the Z position a little bit and reposition the X here. So what we wanted to achieve here is to hide this rectangle if there is no text in the text box. So I'm going to set up a scene here. I'm just going to copy this group 2 more times until we have 3 in total. And I'm going to spread these out. So I'm going to move one up towards the top and move the last one down towards the bottom. Now I want to throw these 3 groups within another group, and I'm going to set up my scene here to control it with our control plugins. So I'm going to go back into my built-ins, into the control folder. First thing that we want to do is control our text. So I'm going to drag a control text down onto our first text container. I'm going to leave this field identifier at 1. I'm going to drag another text controller onto our second text container. I'm going to set this field ID to 2, and then one more text controller onto our third text container. I'm going to set this field ID to 3. Now I want the ability to hide this rectangle if there's no text in the box. So I'm going to use this Control Hide On Empty again. I'm going to slide this down onto the rectangle. And again, since this is our first text group and our field identifier is set to 1 on this one, I'm going to set this field identifier for our Hide On Empty to 1 as well. I'm going to turn the Treat Numerical Value off. I'm going to drag another Control Hide On Empty onto my other rectangle. I'm going to set this field identifier to 2, and then I'm going to drag a third Control Hide On Empty onto our third rectangle, and I'm going to set this field identifier to 3. I'm going to save this scene, and we're going to go into Trio and test it out. So once in Trio, I already have this scene imported basically, so I'm just going to right click and we're going to hit import. Now this time we should have 3 containers or 3 tab fields here with text and a Hide On Empty. And right now nothing is showing up because we have no text in any of these boxes. So as I come in here and type in text, you can see how these boxes now appear. So if we wanted all 3 lines to appear, we would need to type all 3 lines in here. If you want to take one line out, we could just delete everything in there, and now it hides that line completely. So this was 3 different examples that you can use the Control Hide On Empty function.